Hello, beautiful. I'm so glad you're here for another installment of Captain Frederick Marryat's diary. Oh, before we jump in, remember, if you like my videos, please let me know by hitting that subscribe button. Alright, without further ado, let's see what the good captain is up to. The dogs are all tied up, and the mosquitoes have broke loose. It is high time to leave New York. The American steamboats have been often described. When I first saw one of the largest sweep round the battery, with her 2 decks, the upper one screened with snow-white awnings, the gay dresses of the ladies, the variety of colors. It reminded me of a floating garden, and I fancied that the Isola Bella on the Lake of Como had got underway and made the first steam voyage to America. The Hudson is a noble stream, flowing rapidly through its bold and deep bed. Already it has many associations connected with it, a great many for the time which has elapsed since Henrik Hudson first explored it. Where is the race of red men who hunted on its banks, or fished and paddled their canoes in its streams? They have disappeared from the earth, and scarce a vestige remains of them, except in history. No portion of this world was ever intended to remain for ages untenanted. Beasts of prey and noxious reptiles are permitted to exist in the wild and uninhabited regions until they're swept away by the broad stream of civilization, which, as it pours along, drives them from hold to hold until they finally disappear. About 30 miles from New York is Tarrytown, the abode of Washington Irving, who has here embosomed himself in his own region of romance, for Sleepy Hollow lies between his domicile. Nearly opposite to it is a site of a mournful reality, the spot where poor Major Andre was hung up as a spy. You pass the state prison, built on a spot which still retains its Indian name, Sing Sing, rather odd name for a prison where people are condemned to perpetual silence. It is a fine building of white marble, like a palace, very appropriate for that portion of the sovereign people who may qualify themselves for a residence in it. I had a genuine Yankee story from one of the party on deck. I was inquiring if the Hudson was frozen up or not during the winter. This led to a conversation as to the severity of the winter, when one man, by way of proving how cold it was, said, "Why, I had a cow on my lot, up the river, and last winter she got in among the ice and was carried down 3 miles before we could get her out again. The consequence has been that she has milked nothing but ice creams ever since." When you have ascended about 50 miles, the bed of the river becomes contracted and deeper, and it pours its waters rapidly through the highlands on each side, having at some distant time forced its passage through a chain of rocky mountains. It was quite dark long before we arrived at West Point, which I had embarked to visit. A storm hung over us, and as we passed through the broad masses piled up on each side of the river, at one moment illuminated by the lightning as it burst from the opaque clouds, and the next towering in sullen gloom. The effect was sublime. Here I am at West Point. West Point is famous in the short history of this country. It is the key of the Hudson River. The trader Arnold had agreed to deliver it up to the English, and it was on his return from arranging the terms with Arnold that André was captured and hung. At present, a military college is established here, which turns out about 40 officers every year. Although they receive commission in any regiment of the American Army when there may be vacancies, they are all educated as engineers. The Democrats have made several attempts to break up this establishment as savoring too much of monarchy, but hitherto have been unsuccessful. It would be a pity if they did succeed, for such has been the demand lately for engineers to superintend railroads and canals, that a large portion of them have resigned their commissions and found employment in the different states. The consideration alone is quite sufficient to warrant the keeping up of the college, for civil engineers are a sine qua non in a country like America, and they are always ready to serve should their military services be required. There was an inspection at the time I was there, and it certainly was highly creditable to the students as well as to those who superintended the various departments. When I awoke the next morning, I threw open the blinds of my windows, which looked out upon the river, and really was surprised and delighted. A more beautiful view I never gazed upon. The Rhine was fresh in my memory, but although the general features of two rivers are not dissimilar, there is no one portion of the Rhine which can be compared to the Hudson at West Point. It was what you may imagine the Rhine to have been in those days of Caesar, when the lofty mountains through which it sweeps were not bared and naked as they are now, but clothed with forest and rich in all the variety and beauty of undisturbed nature. There is a sweet little spot not far from the college where a tomb has been erected in honor of Kosciuszko. It is called Kosciuszko's Garden. I often sat there and talked over the events of the War of Independence. Many anecdotes were narrated to me. Some of them were very original. I will mention one or two which have not escaped my memory. Now, my men, you see them are Belgians, every man of them bought by the King of England at 17s 16d a head, and I've a notion he paid too dear for them. Now, my men, we either beats them this day, or Molly Stark's a widow. He did beat them, and in his dispatches to headquarters he wrote, "We've had a dreadful hot day of it, General, and I've lost my horse, saddle, bridle, and all." In those times, losing a saddle and bridle was as bad as losing a horse. At the same affair, the captain commanding the outpost was very lame, and he thought proper thus to address his men. "Now, my lads, you see we're only an outpost, and we are not expected to beat the whole army in face of us. The duty of an outpost, when the enemy comes on, is to go and treat it, and keeping ourselves not exposed. Now, you have my orders, and as I am a little lame, I'll go in first. And mind you do your duty, and come in after me." I passed several days at this beautiful spot, which is much visited by the Americans. Some future day, when America shall have become wealthy, and New York the abode of affluence and ease, what taste may not be lavished on the banks of this noble river? And what a lovely retreat will be West Point, if permitted to remain in all its present wilderness and grandeur. I re-embarked at midnight in the steamboat descending from Albany, and which is fitted out as a night boat. When I descended into the cabin, it presented a whimsical sight. 2 rows of bed places on each side of the immense cabin, running right fore and aft. 3 other rows in the center. Each of these 5 rows having 3 bed places, one over the other. There were upwards of 500 people, laying in every variety of posture, and exhibiting every state and degree of repose. From the loud, uneasy snorer, lying on his back, to the deep sleeper, tranquil as death, I walked up and down through these long ranges of unconsciousness, thinking how much care was for the time forgotten. But as the air below was oppressive, and the moon was beautiful in the heavens, I went on deck, and watched the swift career of the vessel, which, with a favoring tide, was flying past the shores at the rate of 20 miles an hour. 1 or 2 people only, out of so many hundreds on board of her, silently watching over the great principle of locomotion. The moon sank down, the sun rose and gilded the verdure of the banks and the spires of New York, as I reveled in my own thoughts and enjoyed the luxury of being alone, a double luxury in America, where the people are gregarious and would think themselves very ill-bred if they allowed you 1 moment for meditation or self-examination. All right, beautiful. That does it for today's chapter. I hope you enjoyed this reading, and if you did, please let me know by hitting that subscribe or like button. All right, take care, and I will see you next week.